The dinner had barely begun when Grandma Eleanor walked into the room, stopped beside the doorway, and stared at the woman sitting in her chair. Nobody noticed the change in her expression at first. The soft music was still playing, candles were glowing across the long dining table, and everyone was smiling as if this were supposed to be the happiest family dinner of the year. But Eleanor's eyes were fixed on one thing, the seat at the head of the table that had belonged to her for more than 30 years. And the woman sitting there was not a stranger. She was someone Eleanor had once welcomed into her home, trusted with her family, and defended when everyone else had turned away. Eleanor slowly removed her coat, looked around the silent room, and said something that made every person at the table freeze. "Get up. You have no idea what that seat means." For years, Eleanor had been the heart of the family. After losing her husband, she had raised her only son, Daniel, while working long hours and making sure he never felt the weight of everything she had sacrificed. When Daniel grew up and married Claire, Eleanor welcomed her daughter-in-law with open arms. She never treated Claire like an outsider. She taught her family recipes, helped her through difficult days, and even cared for her when Daniel traveled for work. But as the years passed, something changed. Daniel became successful, the family moved into a beautiful home, and the simple dinners Eleanor loved became expensive gatherings where appearances mattered more than feelings. Eleanor began noticing that Claire cared more about what the neighbors thought than what the family needed. Still, she remained quiet because she believed love sometimes meant giving people time to find their way back. Then came the night of Daniel's anniversary celebration. The dining room looked like something from a magazine. Crystal glasses stood beside white plates, flowers covered the center of the table, and warm golden lights filled the room. Family members had traveled from different cities to celebrate. Eleanor arrived later than expected because she had spent the afternoon visiting an old friend in the hospital. She entered the dining room expecting laughter, familiar faces, and the comfort of home. Instead, she saw a young woman sitting in her chair at the head of the table. The woman wore an elegant gold dress and looked completely comfortable, as though she belonged there. Claire sat several seats away, watching her nervously. Daniel stood beside the table with an expression Eleanor could not understand. The young woman was named Vanessa. She had recently become Daniel's business partner and had been spending more and more time with the family. At first, Eleanor had thought Vanessa was simply confident and ambitious. But during the dinner, she noticed little things that others ignored. Vanessa interrupted people, spoke as though she owned the house, and treated Claire with an uncomfortable coldness. When Eleanor saw her sitting in the chair reserved for the family matriarch, something inside her broke. It was not because of the chair itself. Eleanor had never cared about furniture. That chair had been bought by her husband when they were newly married. They had eaten their first Thanksgiving together at that table. They had celebrated Daniel's graduation there. They had cried together there after losing family members. The chair represented memories, sacrifice, and a home built through love. Eleanor walked toward the table, but before she could say anything, Vanessa smiled and told her there was another seat available. The room suddenly became unbearably quiet. Eleanor looked at Daniel, hoping he would speak. Instead, he lowered his eyes. That hurt more than anything Vanessa had said. Eleanor had spent her entire life protecting her son, but now, when she needed him to protect her dignity, he could not even look at her. She slowly turned toward Claire and saw tears forming in her daughter-in-law's eyes. That was when Eleanor realized something was terribly wrong. Rather than causing a scene, Eleanor pulled out a chair and sat quietly at the far end of the table. Dinner continued, but the laughter had disappeared. Vanessa talked confidently about Daniel's business and hinted that Claire did not understand the world Daniel was building. She even suggested that Daniel needed people around him who could help him move forward. Eleanor listened carefully. She began connecting things she had noticed during the past few months: the unanswered phone calls, Claire's sudden sadness, Daniel's distant behavior, and Vanessa's growing presence in their lives. Then Vanessa made a mistake. She reached into her handbag and placed a folder on the table. She told Daniel that the documents inside would make everything easier if he signed them that evening. Eleanor looked at the folder and noticed Claire's name on one of the pages. Claire suddenly stood up, trembling. She finally admitted that Vanessa had been pressuring Daniel to remove Claire from several parts of the family business. Worse, Vanessa had convinced Daniel that Claire was holding him back. Daniel looked shocked, as though hearing the truth for the first time. Eleanor stood slowly. Her voice was calm, but every word carried the strength of a woman who had survived far more than anyone at that table understood. She told Daniel that success was worthless if it required him to abandon the people who loved him before he became successful. She reminded him that Claire had stood beside him when he had nothing. She had worked extra hours, cared for their children, supported his dreams, and never asked for recognition. Then Eleanor looked at Vanessa and said that the most dangerous person in a family was not always the person who shouted or caused trouble. Sometimes it was the person who quietly convinced someone to forget who loved them before they had money. Vanessa became defensive, but Eleanor did not argue. Instead, she asked Daniel one simple question: if Claire had lost everything tomorrow, would he still want her beside him? Daniel looked at his wife. For the first time that evening, he truly saw her. He saw the exhaustion in her eyes, the tears she had been hiding, and the woman who had stood beside him through every difficult season. He remembered their tiny apartment, their first broken car, their late-night meals, and the day Claire had told him she believed in his dream even when nobody else did. Daniel pushed the folder away. He apologized to Claire in front of everyone. Then he walked toward Eleanor, took her hand, and asked her to sit in her chair. Eleanor looked at him for several seconds before smiling through her tears. But instead of sitting down, she took Claire's hand and brought her to the head of the table. Eleanor told her that the chair was never really hers. It belonged to the person who understood that family was built on loyalty, kindness, and sacrifice. That night, Claire sat in Eleanor's chair while Eleanor sat beside her. The dinner ended differently than anyone expected. Vanessa quietly left, but the family stayed together long after the food had gone cold. Daniel apologized again, not only to Claire but to his mother. He admitted that success had made him afraid of losing what he had built, and that fear had made him blind to the people who had helped him build it. Eleanor hugged her son and told him that making a mistake did not make him a bad person. Refusing to correct it would have. Years later, the family still talked about that dinner. But they never remembered the expensive food, the flowers, or the beautiful decorations. They remembered the moment Eleanor stopped the dinner and reminded everyone that a seat at a table means nothing if the people sitting around it have forgotten how to love one another. And every Thanksgiving after that, Eleanor's chair remained at the head of the table, but no one sat in it until she arrived. Sometimes, the person who seems to be protecting a chair is actually protecting a lifetime of memories. And sometimes, one brave moment of truth can save an entire family from falling apart. If this story touched your heart, take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more emotional stories about love, family, kindness, and second chances. And before you leave, tell us in the comments, if you were Eleanor, would you have spoken up at that dinner, or would you have stayed silent to protect the family?